Welcome to your classroom coffee break. I'm John Van Dusen, long-term teacher, coach, and Army officer. In this episode, we're going to talk about something that every single teacher has to deal with, whether you're at an elementary school, a middle school, or a high school, and that is meeting the expectations of your administration. So let's dive right in. First thing I think it's important that you understand your role when it comes to dealing with the administration, but it's also important to understand their role in the building and in the district. So first off, your principal, assistant principal, and other administrators are in charge of the entire school, in charge of making sure it runs smoothly and ensuring that the students are safe and get the best education possible. So it's also important to know your role as a teacher is to, one, keep students safe, two, keep your administration informed, and then also provide the best education possible. So understanding your role is super important, especially if you decide to take on additional duties such as being a student council rep or being a union rep. That can cause a little bit of friction. If you're a sports coach or if you're leading some kind of organization like a chess club or some other after school club, it's important to understand your role in that system and how it all fits together. So I'll share a personal story about my first administration encounter, and that was I got my first job about 2 weeks after I had just left Iraq, where I was leading an infantry platoon of 40 people against Al-Qaeda terrorists. Now I'm in an 8th grade classroom as a part-time teacher. I was only 5/7 time. And I see the administration doing things differently than I would have done it. But again, I'm bringing in that military experience and that military mindset. And I actually knew nothing about how to run a school district. And that first year or two, I would describe my relationship with the admin as a little abrasive. And I'm going to take a bunch of responsibility for that because of the mindset I brought to the job. I saw it strictly as a leadership job, and that was something that I knew a lot about, and I wasn't seeing what I thought should be done, and I would make my voice heard. I was hearing terms from the administration like, make sure you use your chain of command. Great. I know exactly what that is. I know how to do that. But then I didn't see it done in practice the way I understood it to be. So a big part of my problem was I didn't understand my role as a brand new teacher in this district that had been running for a very long time before John Van Dusen got there. Now I am going to put some of the onus on the administration too, because I also don't feel like I was onboarded very well. And to their credit, they had a ton of things going on beginning of the school year. I was hired 3 days before school started. Maybe they didn't have time to lay out those expectations in a way that I could understand them. They thought I understood them. So then we had a communication breakdown, which we're going to talk about a little bit later in the episode. But the most important part when you're first coming into a school district is understand your role in the system and try to understand your principal's role and where you mesh and fit together. Fast forward a few years, I'm a more seasoned teacher. I understand my role better, and my relationship with my administration is fantastic because I stay within my lane. I allow my principals to do their job and I keep them informed. We have some great communication, and it's a unique situation because my principal actually graduated from high school with me. So we were friends before we even left high school, and now she's my boss. But we'll hear from her later in the episode as well. So some common admin requests you may get at a former school I taught at. We had to turn in our lesson plans every week before we taught the lesson. I didn't understand the process or the reason why. And it basically just came down to they wanted to ensure that all of their teachers were teaching to the Michigan mandated standards. And the best way to do that was to turn in lesson plans on Friday, the week before, so they could make sure we were on track. If they got any questions from the school board, from parents, they already had that documentation in place. And as a young teacher, it actually helped me to make sure I was staying on track with the state mandated standards and other things that I was expected to do, whether that's leading an after school program, assemblies, emergency action drills like fire drills and lockdown drills, all those different types of things. Those all went on the plan. So it actually, as much as I didn't like it or understand it at the time, it did help me as a brand new teacher to kind of streamline my process and make sure that I was staying on track. So I think the best way you can do that is use some kind of system. If you go to johnvandusen.com under the For Teachers tab, you'll see that I have a Marzano style lesson design template, and you can get it for free. And it's a great way to help organize your lessons. If you're a Marzano school, it's a great way to organize your lessons and make sure you're staying on track. It's something that I use every day, and it's something that I use year to year. I simply just tweak the lessons a little bit if I find a new video or a new worksheet I want to use, sometimes a new project, but I still have that basic template of how I want to deliver the content. And that's just one way that you can easily meet those administrator expectations when it comes to turning in lesson plans or other types of documentation. So another common requirement is going to be either data tracking and reporting. And this could be on grades, this could be on your content expectations, this could be on behavior. And as a brand new teacher, you're going to fall into a school that already has these types of systems in place. So you don't have to reinvent the wheel. What you do have to do is get with your mentor teacher, get with the teacher down the hall, get with your principal if needed, to make sure that you are following the correct procedure when it comes to data collection and reporting. So at Kingsford, we have a bunch of online systems. We're a Google school. We have shared spreadsheets, shared documents, and that is a really easy way for all teachers and administrators to keep track of specifically behavior, lunch detentions, overtimes, and those types of things. We also have Google Forms set up for different types of referrals. So again, you're falling into a school district that already has these systems in place. Now, that doesn't mean they can't get better. And if you have an idea, please share with your admin, because they may be open to changing the system in order to make it more efficient. However, also go back to point one and understand your role as a new teacher. And there has to be a little bit of conformity in that you fall in and follow the systems in place. So the last big ask of your admin is going to be classroom observations. And each district has a different policy on how this works. States are a little different on what is required of the admin when it comes to classroom observations. I'm currently in a year that, because I was marked effective in my classroom, I can go this year without an evaluation. But sometimes as a brand new teacher, you have to have an evaluation. Sometimes you have to have 2 or 3. I talked with a friend one time who had upwards of 50 evaluations in a year, but those evaluations consisted of the principal walking into the room for maybe as little as 1 minute and just observing what was happening in the class. So sometimes they were in the middle of a lesson, middle of a lecture, middle of a project. Sometimes they were in the middle of silent reading. Sometimes they were in the middle of, you have 15 minutes of free time at the end of the hour. But the bottom line was that administrator had a system in place to get those observations, to get not just a snapshot of what that teacher was doing, but how the class was running overall. So when it comes to observations, there's really 2 ways to think about it. The first way you can think about it is, oh no, they're here to tell me what I'm doing wrong. They're going to catch me in a gotcha moment. And that is, again, one way you can think about it, but I would ask you to not do that, because we're all on the same team. Your administrator has the same exact goal you do of providing the best education you can to your students. So when they come in for that observation, whether it's a scheduled observation or an unscheduled walkthrough, use that time to make yourself better. Seek feedback from your admin. They want to see you be successful just as much as you do. Use it as a learning opportunity and as a way to show that you are willing to improve and open to feedback. So there's an interesting difference here between teaching middle schoolers and teaching in the Army. When I went up for the Instructor of the Year competition, there was literally a checklist of things I had to hit on in my lesson. It was a lot more objective in the evaluation, and as long as I hit all those checklist items, I was getting a good score. But when it comes to teaching middle school, there are a few checklist items, but it's a much more subjective method of observing. Are you handling not just the content, but also the classroom behavior? Are you getting students to be engaged? Those different types of things are what your admin wants to see you do when you are providing that excellent education for your students. So next, I'm going to go over a few things that, just as a good educator, you need to do. Again, knowing your role and helping your admin team out, because you are on the same team. And the first one is to be proactive. And what I mean by that is, you have a classroom and there has to be certain things that you can fix on your own without running to your admin team for questions. Now, there are some things that have to be administrator first, but there's also things that you can either Try something new and see if you can make it work, or ask your mentor teacher, ask the teacher down the hall how they would deal with a certain thing. The bottom line is try to be proactive and fix the things you can fix, because your admin already has a ton of things on their plate. If you can keep the items you can control on your plate and off of theirs, they're going to have more time to help make you successful. So be proactive. The second part is be professional. And this one is really interesting for me right now. Again, I mentioned before, Mrs. Jessica Garvalia is my current principal, and her and I graduated school together. So when you look at a yearbook, we are actually peers. However, when we go into that building, I always call her Mrs. Garvalia because she has positional power in the fact that she is the principal and I am a teacher. Now, she also has personal power because we are friends and we are friends outside of school. But when we're in that building, I need to be as professional as I can, be respectful when I disagree, follow her guidance, and try to implement her vision the best I can, even if it's something I don't completely agree with. And if I go back to that first story I told about that first school district I was at, that's where I kind of made some mistakes, and I was trying to implement my own vision of what I thought it should be instead of my leader's vision. And the next thing I would say is show a willingness to grow. When you get those evaluations, when your district adopts a new system for doing something, do your best to implement it exactly how your principal wants, because they're no dummies. They put a lot of work and time into implementing these new things. So try to be a team player and do exactly what they want you to do, exactly how they want you to do it. Now, that does not mean that we don't suggest improvements, but again, be professional and do that in a respectful way. And understand that you are seeing a very tiny slice of the picture where your admin sees a much bigger, broader brushstroke of what's actually happening within the district and your building. So the last thing I'll talk about when it comes to being on the good side of your administrator really is celebrate successes, because your principal and assistant principal have to deal with all kinds of crazy things you would never think of. They have to deal with angry parents. They have to deal with angry school board members. They have to deal with unruly behaviors. Sometimes they have to deal with the police. They have to deal with the UPS guy who's delivering the packages. They have to deal with absences of staff, and they have to try to fill all those roles. So they have a ton of things on their plate. But the reason they got into education is probably because they love working with kids. So whenever your classroom does something great, amazing, something a little out of the ordinary that's worth celebrating, share that with your admin team. My admin team has a couple great systems in place to do that. And if your district doesn't, maybe you can take a leadership role and develop that system so that other teachers can help celebrate those successes. So your administration can see, hey, I'm not just dealing with all of this crap, but I actually have a lot of great things going on in my district. So now we are going to hear from a few different administrators. I had sent out an email and asked them a question, and this question came from our teacher who teaches an educational careers class. So it actually came from one of our high school students who wants to be a teacher, and the question was how to effectively work with administrators and how to incorporate their requirements and requests into your classroom. So first we're going to hear from Bill Velma, who is a superintendent and 612 principal at Superior Central Schools. It's a real small school just south of Marquette, Michigan. And Bill and I actually worked together at Lance, and he was my original mentor teacher. So let's hear what Mr. Velma has to say.
I think probably the best answer that I could think of to this question would be to ask questions of your administrator. Find out what they're looking for, find out what they need, find out how they can help you, and work together. Trust each other. You can do a lot by asking questions and building that trust.
So that really goes back to what we were talking about before with communication, and flashback to where Bill was my first mentor. Him and I had to sit in the principal and superintendent's office a couple times together, mainly because of communication. And that's shame on me, because I should have asked those clarifying and probing questions of my admin to make sure I understood what my role was, what was expected of me, and how I could help make my students more successful. So when I hear Mr. Velma talk there, I'm really hearing be a good communicator. And that communication isn't just one way. It's not just the sender, but it's also how are you receiving it and ensuring you understand what is actually being communicated. So thanks a lot, Mr. Velma. Next, we're going to hear from Mr. Johnson. Brian Johnson is an assistant principal at Woodland Elementary School. They have pre-kindergarten through fourth grade. So let's hear what Mr. Johnson has to say as an assistant principal.
I guess if I had one answer piece of advice to the question regarding communication with administrators, it would be simply to not forget that direct line of communication from you to an administrator. I know it's tempting to do the back channel hallways, parking lot conversations. Just stick with, and what's effective is just those direct conversations between you and an administrator. And I would even argue that's the case. And sometimes that can be a missing piece from staff member to staff member.
So again, with the communication piece, and I think Mr. Johnson brings up a really great point in that it is very easy to be lazy with your communication. And maybe it's, well, I'm just going to ask this teacher who talked to the principal in the lunchroom. That's not the right way to go. The right way to go is direct communication with your supervisor to figure out what needs to be done when it's something you can't fix. And I'm going to say that when it comes to communication, it's really important the medium. So we talk about the three parts of communicating. There's the sender, the medium, and the receiver. So if you are sending that communication, how are you sending it? Again, remember your role and remember your principal's role. They have a ton of things on their plate. So if it's something that's really important, a deadline that needs to be hit, that needs to be in writing. A lot of schools will use simple email. That's a great way to do it. Some schools have like a Google Doc out there for that type of communication. Text message is how our assistant principal at the middle school typically operates. But if it's something that cannot be missed, it needs to be written down because, like Mr. Johnson was saying, if you have a conversation in the hallway or a conversation in the lunchroom, in the parking lot, those details can easily get missed. And now we go back to where we talked about data collection, reporting, and documentation. So it's not just to help you out, but it's also to help out your admin. So now we're going to hear from Miss Jessica Garvalia, again, class of 2000, classmate of mine, but she is now the principal at Kingsford Middle School. So let's hear what Miss Garvalia has to say.
In regards to your question of how to effectively work with administrators and incorporate their requirements and requests in your classroom, it's very important to know your administrator's expectations. You don't know what you don't know. So make it a point to ask questions and understand what the administrator expects of you. Also be open to constructive feedback and make feedback into action. If your administrator is taking the time to give you feedback, they expect to see the feedback in action.
So back on the theme of good communication, and I really liked how she mentioned if you're getting feedback, it's really important to implement that feedback the next time they see you. They're not giving you feedback just to hear themselves talk. Again, they're in every classroom in the building. So if you are doing something and they can see just a little way to tweak it, maybe to do it like the teacher that's down the hall, or maybe they like what you're doing and they give that teacher down the hall a tool that you're using so they can make their teaching better. It's important to understand we're all on the same team here. And she also mentioned those expectations, which again goes down to communication. Are they expressing their expectations clearly so that you understand exactly what is required of you? And if not, that's on you to ask the clarifying question to make sure you understand what's expected of you. Well, if you got any value out of this episode, I'd ask that you like, subscribe, and share so that next time some of your friends can make our classroom coffee break.